Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Wednesday afternoon as Georgia goes through its bye week. The first of two bye weeks in this season. The Bulldogs get a little bit of a break, though they're still working hard, especially knowing that next Saturday they're going to be playing at Alabama. And got a jam-packed episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. A lot to get into, a lot of news, a lot of notes, and a lot to kind of dive into coming off of Georgia's first SEC game of the 2024 season. But guys, let's get into the news from Tuesday night when we had a chance to talk to Kirby Smart. Confirmed that right guard Tate Ratledge has had tightrope surgery on his injured ankle. We don't have a timeline yet, though Kirby did say that Tate has already begun the rehab process. Honestly, and I believe Ben made this point when he was injured and on Sunday when we were learning more about the situation, probably the best possible situation given how it looked. I know, I think Ben and I both felt like, he could be out for the year, but you're hoping maybe you can get him back late October, early November. But let's look for the next few weeks. We know Tate will not be available. I'll start with you, Kipp. Just how big of a loss is this for Georgia not having their starting right guard and having a veteran offensive lineman in Tate Ratledge?
Well, it's a huge loss because not only him being a veteran, being highly talented, one of your overall best blockers, but it just helps that veteran leadership in the huddle. I think this is an aspect where you look on the bright side. Georgia had depth there. They have one of the most talented, arguably the strongest player on the team available in Micah Morris to step right in and play snaps, but you're still replacing someone who knows many of the calls, having played so many snaps for Georgia. Just that vocal leadership as well, the accountability. I think when you look at what Kirby Smart's been trying to do this season with Micah Morris, trying to motivate him, trying to make sure that he is ready in practice. There's still that aspect, that unknown of you're not sure how he's going to react to having increased snaps. Maybe the light goes on. We've seen it happen in the past with guys like Amarius Mims. But at the same time, Tate was someone you could just lock in and know that you're going to have, that veteran leadership, that accountability, and that high caliber of play. So it's definitely a big loss, but I think the timing of it still beneficial for Georgia, especially if you can get them back by Florida.
For sure, and also to have a bye week to kind of solidify what this line is going to look like going forward. I asked Kirby Smart on Tuesday night about how he thought the line played once Tate went out, and Kirby kind of downplayed it and said, that Micah Morris has played a lot in the past. They're used to him rotating in, and it's a situation, as Kirby pointed out, they rotate those guys in for a reason, not only because those guys are talented and, could be starting at other schools, but they want guys to be ready in the event that something like this happens. And to lose Tate, even if it's not the entire season, is definitely significant. And, I hated it too for Tate, not only because he's an older guy and he's been around, but, had really talked about taking on the leadership. He said that these last few years, Cedric Van Pran, the center, had been there, and he kind of just let Cedric run the show, and for good reason. But Tate understood that he needed to step up now that Cedric's in the NFL. And from everything I've seen, I think Tate did that. And I think he'll continue to do that. I expect him to be a guy like Nolan Smith that we saw a few years ago when he was out, was still very active, saw him in pregame, trying to get guys ready. I think that Tate's going to still be a big part of this team as he's rehabbing and trying to get back as quickly as he can. Ben, what do you make of this situation, Georgia, having to go without Tate Ratledge at least for these next few weeks?
Yeah, like Kipp said, definitely a loss. And I think that you can't treat it like some of the other tightrope surgery recoveries that we've seen because it's happening with an MCL sprain as well. And I'm not knowledgeable enough to know how that's going to impact the recovery of either of those two things. But it's a big loss for Georgia's offensive line, but this is also why Georgia rotates its offensive linemen the way that it does and why Georgia typically has 7 to 8 offensive linemen more ready than a lot of teams have 5. So I think that Georgia is more prepared to handle something like this. I think that Micah Morris is someone that a lot of people have been begging to see more of on the field over the last couple of years anyway. So this is an opportunity to likely see that. My hunch is that's not the only rotation that we see. I don't think it's just go with your standard 5 and then plug and play Micah. I think that they've rotated and they will likely continue to do that in certain situations where they think that it makes sense. I think that they still have 6 guys on the offensive line that they feel really good about, that they want to get into the game more, get more snaps for. And so I think that you're going to continue to see that. But I think that the person that you'll see with the most snap increase in this is Micah Morris. And I personally am excited to see that because we hear so much about a lot of these guys and only so many of them can play in the games. So this is our opportunity to see some of these guys. So silver lining in the sort of bummer situation with Tate.
Definitely. And with Micah, a guy that stayed around, a guy that, to be honest, I was curious if he might go to the portal just because it was clear, Dylan Fairchild was the favorite to start again, and Micah's going to get his opportunity. Make sure and tell folks to stay glued to Dogs 24/7, especially as we're going forward. We're going to keep tabs on Tate Ratledge, what it's looking like as he works his way back. Well, guys, more news from Tuesday, and this was down in Atlanta rather than in Athens. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed into action on Tuesday an order that prevents the NCAA, any conference, or any other governing body from taking, quote, adverse action against any college institutions in the state. The executive order has to deal with NIL, direct compensation of student athletes. I'll play a few clips in a few minutes about what Kirby Smart had to say, but I'll start with you, Ben. You've done a very good job of writing about this for our site. What do you make of this executive order, and what it does for Georgia as well as the other universities in the state?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely sort of the talk of the NIL world yesterday. I mean, when you're seeing Georgia and NIL and headlines on every national website out there, I mean, it tells you that this was something that brought a lot of interest for folks. And so I think that it's big for Georgia. Kirby Smart, I know you're going to play the clips later, but he said that it keeps them competitive. I mean, it's not news to anybody that it's a wild, wild west by and large out there in recruiting right now. And I mean, while certain things are happening, I think that everyone has felt, and this is not, I'm talking about people in the industry, I think fans have often felt that because everything's just sort of happening, that everything is legal and you're allowed to do whatever. And it's just, that's the way that it is. And that's not the way that it is. There are things that have been happening that don't make everybody comfortable doing, given certain laws and certain NCAA rules and how coaches are allowed to interact with players about money and NIL and things like that. Like, these are all very gray area, fuzzy, uncomfortable things that have just been, in many cases, driven right through over the last couple of years. And so I think that this alleviates some of that for Georgia and says, all right, going forward, we know what the proposed NCAA versus House settlement is going to look like. We know that was put a little bit on the back burner, not on the back burner, but it was pushed back a few steps in the last couple of weeks when federal judge said, hey, this is not looking the way that we need it to look. You need to go back and do it entirely. So it's not just a little bit of a facelift. Like, it is a complete restructuring of what they're going to put forward. And so that's going to take a lot of time. And so because of that, and I'd heard about this over the last couple of weeks when it came to the 105 scholarship limit, that schools really were feeling like the 105 scholarship limit was not something that they could even think about imminently, because they don't think that the settlement that was going to include that was going to have anything, so there's so much that still needs to be figured out with all of that I think that this basically is a temporary order that says anything that you were going to be allowed to do under that rev share agreement, you are now going to essentially be allowed to do under this. That is a much simplified, abridged version of what it means, but more or less, based on the timeframes that were put in place in the order, it's either when a law is put into place that specifically outlines what's allowed and what's not allowed with all of this, or when the settlement comes down and it's a final effective date is finalized. And so it's good news for Georgia because it means there's a lot less that they have to worry about. And to Kirby Smart's point, you can be competitive. You don't have to worry about some of the, consequences that could come along with some of these things if people aren't careful, which many places haven't been very careful through all of this. Though I think just the way that it's trending, you're probably going to come out on the positive side of that if you did.
Yeah, Ben made the biggest point that I wanted to say, and probably should have said from the jump, that this is essentially put into place because kind of hit the brakes on this House versus NCAA settlement. They're still kind of working through that. So it makes sense from that standpoint. And, I wanted to point out, I don't know how much Kirby Smart had to do with this, but we've seen him pull the strings behind the scenes. The change to the FOIA laws in the state of Georgia when he was hired, they had a lot to do with pushing back how quickly they can that they have to turn around when you make a FOIA request, state employees or state organizations. So I wouldn't be surprised if Kirby had his hand in it, or at least had folks in his camp pushing to have this passed. Kipp, what is your reaction to this executive order and what it means for Georgia? And as Kirby made sure to point out, Georgia Tech, all the other schools in the state also benefit from this.
It just makes it easier every month. They don't have to go into their, have a budget meeting with the Classic City Collective. They could just figure out this is exactly what we need and take care of it. It's all temporary. It could all change down the road. But, now it's just, you knew that eventually the Classic City Collective, it's still going to exist, but it was going to be something that's handled in-house. Why would Georgia still have to want to deal with a third party if they have the ability not to? I think now you still are going to have the Classic City Collective for anything outside of that. But now Georgia can, know exactly what they have to offer their own athletes. A clear, this is exactly what, we have available, and there's no mystery involved. So I just think it's not exactly cutting out the middleman, but it's making it more efficient. It's providing them some protection to know that we are going to have this in place for now. And, now their people, their numbers, people, whatever, they can handle it and just, it's going to help Georgia's roster. Yeah, it's going to help Georgia Tech's roster, the other, the rosters in state as well, because now that, again, they're not going to be held back by anything else. They're going to know exactly what they can get, or they can give anybody who plays for Georgia Tech, Georgia Southern, every school in Georgia. So I think it's just more of a streamlining, some protections in place for now, and just knowing exactly what they have to offer. It's one less thing that Kirby Smart and his coaching staff have to worry about communicating with third parties. They can now just, we got it. We can handle it directly. And I think this is how it will be down the road, I imagine, unless there's just a huge change to how the entire college football landscape is after the settlement. I think this is how it will be for every college. And, you talk about other schools. Tennessee adding that 10% service fee to the tickets. This is a different landscape. They are making sure that, they're getting the revenue they need for their roster. I found that one much more interesting than the Georgia executive order, just because it's just another instance where schools are saying, we want to make the exact same money we're making now. We're going to pass the buck along to you, the fan. We're going, the players are going to be compensated, and we will not be impacted by that with our bottom line, our profit margin. So I just think that, again, that was the more eye-opening thing that came out yesterday for me personally. But I do think that Georgia's executive order is just good just for them having that peace of mind of knowing what they have to offer.
Nothing quite like having your football team subsidized, but whatever you can do to keep your salaries high, I guess you're going to do whatever you want to do there, Tennessee. Want to make sure and play a couple of clips of Kirby talking about this new executive order. This first clip is just sort of his initial reaction to it and what it does for Georgia and, again, the other schools in the state.
Be competitive as we can be in our field of endeavor. It's this world we live in, and it's not just us, apparently. It's the whole state of Georgia, USG, and very appreciative of Governor Kemp and his staff for allowing us to be competitive and putting us on a level playing field, and to continue to support our student athletes. This is going to benefit the student athletes, and very appreciative of them supporting that and getting it done.
Before we watch this second clip, I wanted to point out that the money that these schools are giving the student athletes, it's not coming from the state. And I do think that's really important. I mean, that it's up to these schools to have the money that, they're not pulling money that would be used on books or something like that to pay these student athletes. This second clip from Kirby, I thought was really interesting, and basically the necessity of having this executive order. And Kirby was asked point blank if he felt like Georgia had lost recruits because of something like this not being in place before.
Or, I mean, it's all about what you have available, right? And some people are willing to spend beyond their ability to raise it, like unfulfilled promises. Like, we're not going to have unfulfilled promises where guys reach back out and say, well, they said they could do this and they didn't. They said they could do that and they didn't. So we've lost some in those regards, but I don't know that it was an inability to do it. It was not going to go step over our skis and like put our body over and put too much out there and say, okay, we've committed to this and you can't do it. So it's a hard world out there because you don't really know what you can and can't do. People make promises and there's nobody has a bounty sitting out there that big that they can pay everybody that. And so, you try to be judgmental, you try to make good decisions on players. You want people in your program that really not making it about just that. Because when it's just about that, it'll never stop. And that's not going to change based on what the governor does. With the governor's thing, it's not like it's going to be this open surplus. It's just helping us, be competitive with others. And I'm sure Georgia Tech feels the same way. You're out there competing in a really competitive environment, and there's times you feel like you want to do something and you can't. And now, hopefully, we've got the capabilities to do what we need to do.
Couple things I want to get into there, guys. One, I feel like from what we've gotten to see behind the scenes, especially as NIL has come together, that Georgia's always been really level-headed with how they handle the NIL piece of recruitment. But two, and I'm just going to kind of leave this open to either one of y'all, when he says unfulfilled promises, do y'all think of anyone else besides Jaden Rashada? Because that's immediately who my mind goes to.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to put anybody on blast necessarily out here, but I've you hear stories in the recruiting world where there are unfulfilled promises all across the country. So I'm sure Jaden Rashada's is one of many.
Yeah, I would say that wasn't like a shot at Florida or anything like that. But, I mean, to have a guy on your roster that, is kind of a testimony to it. I mean, Kipp, I saw you shaking your head. That's kind of where you were.
To be clear, I was not saying don't put Florida on blast. They've already been sued. You can put them on blast as much as you want. I was talking about others that maybe things have just been, hearsay or whatever.
Kipp, what do you think?
I thought about that immediately, and then I was, we don't want to deal with hypotheticals here, but that's exactly what we're dealing with. I also thought about that 2022 Texas A&M class. I mean, that was the NIL like class of classes where they set all the records, but then you saw on social media from their players saying, I didn't get either what you said I was getting or what I thought I was getting. I mean, whether it was like the Walter Nolans, the Shamar Stewarts, the Evan Stewarts, that class, that's just what that class was kind of known of, them taking advantage of that. And then when the bill came due for Jimbo Fisher, I just think that maybe, that there had to be some budget cuts along the way. I don't know, but I think that's kind of where you get into a lot of these players. And now when you have people throwing around valuations and things like that, it's just like there's a lot of debate on whether these guys are getting what people are thinking they're getting. And I mean, when it comes to the quarterback position, I do think it's different. I mean, that's it. You're starting quarterback. There's not a more valuable position in college football. So I get it. And we talked about all offseason with Carson Beck coming back. That was not a zero sum. I mean, there was some investment involved there, on Georgia's and all their collective part. But at the same time, I think putting out there that guys are getting $700,000, $1 million coming out of high school, 3-year deals, things like that. I think once they get on campus, they find not only are there strings attached, but your chances of realizing those numbers are slim to none.
Ben, any thoughts on what Kirby had to say? Anything else on the executive order?
No, I mean, I think that he clearly was glad that it happened. I think that you could tell his first word, he just said appreciative, and he was point blank, cut and dry. That's how I felt about it. And I think that right there tells you that it's something that makes his life easier. And so he's glad that it happened.
We're going to take a quick break, come back, wrap up week 3, both for Georgia and the entire college football world, talk about what we heard from Kirby Smart and players on Tuesday night, and talk about the bye week, talk about some high school recruits for the Dogs, and talk a little UGA hoops. Well, guys, before we turn our attention to what Georgia's been doing during the bye week, need to look back to week 3. Georgia wins 13-12. Obviously, an ugly game up in Lexington. You guys did a great job on the post-game podcast. Listen to that on my way back from Lexington. But wanted to make sure we had a chance to kind of give our final thoughts, anything that stood out, especially in the rewatch of the game. Some of the things that I would say, Trevor Etienne, I thought was huge in that second half. You know, he was the driving force of Georgia's only touchdown drive of that game. Offensive line, I thought, struggled early on. Carson didn't have his best in that first half, but I felt like they took a step forward after halftime. Biggest question for me going forward, I need to see better perimeter blocking. You know, I think we kind of took for granted Brock Bowers, Lab McConkey, Marcus Rosemary, Jack Saint, not only because they were playmakers, but those guys were hellacious blockers, and there were missed blocks. I really need to see a receiver step up as a perimeter blocker. I'd say right now Dylan Bell is your best blocker. Defense, I thought on the whole played really well. Kyrian Ingram Dawkins, I mean, I thought he was outstanding. You know, I thought he looked good in week 2 against Tennessee Tech, but you kind of take it with a grain of salt. And I don't know where they would have been on Saturday if TID wasn't playing. I thought he had an outstanding game. And then Jalen Walker, I think Kipp pointed this out on the postgame podcast. He needs to have a talk with whoever recorded the quarterback hurries for the Kentucky game, the official statistics. They had him at 1, and PFF had him at 8, and I think it was closer to 8 because Jalen was just an absolute madman. Kipp, what stood out to you? What sticks with you coming out of that Kentucky game? Anything that you feel like really stands out a few days removed from it?
Yeah, I mean, you took the first point on my list as far as the perimeter blocking. I think that's just one aspect that we didn't assign enough value to as far as the impact of the departure of Rosemary Jack Saint. I think when you look at the championship run, you had Darnell Washington, you had Kyrus Jackson. Those guys just took pride in that. And you didn't really notice their departure because then you had Brock Bowers and Rosemary Jack Saint. So now those guys are gone. It's up to not just the receivers, though. I mean, Oscar Delp and my goodness, Jurasik. I mean, you got to get out there and put a hat on a hat because you whiffed a couple times. And, I mean, that may have played well with the Cardinal, but I can't see how in the film room they're not, Todd Hartley is not looking at this and going, this bye week, you better be willing at the point of attack or you're going to lose snaps to Jaden Riddell. I mean, again, Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, they might be asked to play, 30 snaps each or, more than that if they're, in 12 personnel. But I think you have to show you can handle it this week because, Arian Smith, that's not going to be in his skill set. He's not going to have that in his toolbox. Dom Lovett, probably not either. And Colby Young, I mean, he just needs to get more snaps. I think that hamstring, him being banged up in camp had an impact. Well, now it's the bye week. I mean, this is it. You got to install that and make sure that he's ready to play because I think that's an aspect where he might be able to bring you more in the game. I think the biggest play of that game was Arian Smith falling on that Oscar Delp fumble because that would have given Kentucky the ball with, a minute 40 left. Instead, Georgia got the first down. I think on defense, we're talking about missed tackles in this game, having more than they had at any point last season. I look at it as D-line snaps. When you look at the Alabama loss last season, you had Nazir Stackhouse playing 42, Mike Hill played 37, and Warren Brinson played 30. That Kentucky game, you had Tiernan Ingram Dawkins playing 63 snaps, Kristen Miller playing 58, and Nazir played 52. Georgia asked their guys to do a lot on the defensive line. That's why they rotate so much. I think 30 snaps is kind of that breaking point in terms of you're going to get efficient play from a Georgia D lineman based on their responsibility. And then after those three guys, the next guy was like Gabe Harris at 17. And so Kirby talks about creating depth. They need that depth. Luckily, I think they're going to have good news in that as far as the health front. But I think that really played a huge role, not just in missed tackles, but also it impacted contain. And I think that's where Brock, Vandegrift was able to kind of take advantage of that, which at the same time actually helps him a little bit. He basically was Georgia's scout team quarterback for Jalen Milroe, if you're looking ahead. So that's the very condensed version of what I had written down, the best I could do, because I have so many notes as far as like TT stunts, the offensive line play. My goodness, Xavier Truss, throw that film in the garbage, and hopefully you never get to it again, because I think now, he could be they could be asking him to play right guard. We're talking about rotation. Who is that rotating guard now? Maybe it's him, and you have Momo playing it at right tackle. I think that's something they might want to take a look at this week.
Yeah, I wanted to just read this comment from Stephen Fowler. Let's see if I can get it up there. Perimeter blocking was atrocious. There were a handful of plays that would have been explosive, not for that. And I think so. And Kipp, you kind of took, and I wanted to figure out how I was going to say it nicely, but Ben Jurasik has really got to take a step forward, because it was bad when he was on the field on Saturday. Ben, what about you? Thoughts on that game? Anything that sticks with you a few days later?
Yeah, well, I'll triple that Ben slander that we've all been on now so far. I think it's hard. He played 7 snaps in the game, and you noticed him on like 3 of them. So I think it's just tough to not point the finger in that regard. But he's got a couple weeks to get better. I completely agree with Stephen Fowler's comment and some of the comments that you all had made about the perimeter blocking. And I knew that Kirby was going to be asked yesterday about the offensive struggles. I'm sure you're going to play the clip, or you might play the clip too, but I knew what his answer was going to be, because it's what his answer is every time that Georgia has a sluggish offensive performance, and it annoys people, but it's also totally accurate. And it's that if you go back and watch it, there are so many plays where one guy does something wrong, and all it takes is one tight end in the slot missing a block. All it takes is one wide receiver missing a block. All it takes is one offensive lineman missing an assignment. And you do that 3 times in a row, one guy making the mistake, and that's a 3 and out. And so I think that Georgia experienced that, and has experienced that more this year than it has in past years. I also think it experienced that a lot, especially early in the Kentucky game. There's a lot of moments that you can look at and say, oh, this is a screen to Arian Smith, and if this one guy makes a block, that's a 30-yard play. And then instead it doesn't, and everyone looks back at it and says, why does Bobo keep calling all these runs or all these screens or whatever? And I don't look at it that way, because you look like there are people complaining about Bobo in this game. And I get your frustrations are always going to go to offensive coordinator. And I'm not saying that anybody offensively or anywhere was really without fault in this game, because there were issues across the board. But in this game, it did not have to do with play calling. It really didn't. People were complaining about the runs. Oh, we're running the ball too much. If Georgia doesn't establish the run and just say, hey, Trevor Etienne, here's the rock and go make a play, Georgia doesn't score on its only touchdown drive in that game. And so I think at a certain point, you have to ask players to make plays. And there are times that you got one guy whiff here, you get one guy whiff there. And it wasn't Carson's best game either. Again, not to sit there and point fingers, but to say that everybody played a hand, I think, in how it went. And I think that Kirby's answer was very predictable, but it was also very true in that there were a lot of situations here and there that cause a quick 3 and out.
Well, Ben, why don't we just play that clip? Kirby was asked about trying to start faster, and this is what he had to say.
There's so many steps. There's tons of them. Clean up what you do it at a higher rate, make good decisions, communicate better. It's hard to say one thing on that, because there's a lot of things not a lot of things go wrong, but one thing going wrong can mess up a play, and it takes one person messing up on offense. If one person messes up consecutively, you got 3 bad plays. And certainly we just got to execute better, I think, and do a good job with guys, doing what they do in practice. If we do what we do in practice and do it against good people, which they get a chance to do it against real good people in practice, they'll do it better. So I don't know that we can point to one thing on that.
Yeah, Ben, as you pointed out, I mean, it's a pretty standard answer from Kirby, but I think he's 100% right. And I was going to make that point when you're talking about Mike Bobo. To me, it's more about execution than the play that's being called. And Trevor Etienne talked about that as well. We'll hear from him in a little bit. But he was asked what he wanted to see improvement on in the bye week, and he said execution. So, again, I wouldn't say no one with that offense was without fault. But I had more of an issue with certain guys just, not doing the assignment, because that's all it takes is one guy, as Ben said, to not do their job, and a whole play gets ruined.
And I'll also say, I mean, Carson missed a couple shots in that one that I'm not going to say are uncharacteristic, because he's been known to miss some of those from time to time. Like, it's not his wheelhouse, but if he hits a couple of those, it changes the game. And I'll just say those are the types of layups you can't miss against Alabama, because I think that's Jalen Milroe's bread and butter. I mean, you give him those shots down the field, an opportunity to get an explosive and change a game. I think that's what he does best. And I think that Carson Beck's going to have to be at his best in that in 2 weeks, or it might get ugly in Tuscaloosa.
It could steamroll. I mean, like, you have Ernest Green giving up pressure early in the game, and that rattled Carson Beck. He started moving too early in the pocket. He was unable to anticipate his pass catchers. But at the same time, like, this is where Carson Beck has to check into a more advantageous play. Multiple times he had the opportunity to check into a play, and at the same time, like, he had zone reads. He was supposed to keep the ball instead of giving it to ETN. Like, they got behind the 8 ball because of early pressure, and he started missing open guys. I mean, Delp was open across the middle multiple times. Carson's got to trust him to make a play instead of checking down. He's got this predetermined target. He starts playing hot potato with the football, and Xavier Truss gives up the outside on his, and then all of a sudden Carson Beck's lost his trust and protection. He misses chances to check down the Branson Robinson on that 3rd and 3 on the Kentucky 16-yard line, the second quarter. If he trusts his offensive line, he could step up and then make that play, and then they're in a completely different situation. So this stuff can steamroll. When you lose protection early on in the game, it affected Carson Beck, but that's something he's got to be able to handle adversity. You're not going to have everything go on script. You're going to have the bad snap. You're going to have pressure. You're going to have to, improvise. That's where Stetson Bennett, I mean, that's where he made a name for himself. But that is something, that aspect of Carson Beck's game, where you can't just go everything on script and then step into a clean pocket and make that perfect throw to Dominic Lovett for 33 yards. It's not always going to happen like that. So you have to be able to deal with guys in your face and still taking chances early in the football game.
Stetson Bennett in the YouTube comments says we will lose to Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, and Ole Miss. He did leave off the T. It's just Bennett with one T, so he may want to go back and clean that one up. But no, I mean, I think in the end, you look at that game, it's one that they've got to clean a lot up. Again, you talked about Xavier Truss. Ernest Green did not have a very good game either. I think the very first drive, Kentucky brings just 3, and he doesn't even get a hand on him. And then later in the game, Micah Morris on the Branson Robinson touchdown run, I encourage fans to go back and watch that. That should have been a tackle for loss. I mean, Micah Morris didn't even get a hand on the guy, and Branson made an outstanding kind of step juke move to get by him and find the end zone. So, yeah, I would not want to be in the meeting rooms for any of these guys on offense, because it was ugly. But they always say an ugly win is better than a pretty loss, and I think that's a really good example of it. Well, guys, let's jump into some of the stuff we heard on Tuesday night. We played some Kirby Smart clips already. Kirby talked about some of the injured defensive linemen, Michael Williams, Warren Brinson, Jordan Hall, said that they're working their way back. I think he said hopeful, which doesn't surprise me. We know he likes to keep his cards close to the vest, but I'm expecting those guys to be back for Alabama, which is going to be huge, to a point that Kipp talked about earlier. My God, the snap counts of those defensive linemen against Kentucky, that's got to go way down, especially when you consider how long the season is. But I do think they're going to get help on that front. Now, guys, one of the more entertaining parts of Kirby's press conference on Tuesday was after a question about basically balancing building depth with younger players and trying to build chemistry with those guys that are going to play a lot. Kirby kind of took exception to the question, the premise, although Kirby had kind of talked about that same thing during fall camp. But here's the clip, Kirby talking about the importance of building depth, getting those guys ready, because now more than ever, your younger guys are going to wind up playing sooner than they used to.
You talked during fall camp about
and y'all ran with that and said that we didn't care about chemistry. When you try to gain depth, you practice a lot of people, not necessarily with the ones. You practice a lot of people. We do ones, twos, and threes. But when the ones go, the ones go. When the twos go, the twos go. When the threes go, the threes go. We got a group of 3 offensive linemen that there's 5 guys that are all true freshmen. They need lots of practice, because guess what they're going to be next year? Twos. So they need lots of practice. They got to get lots of reps, because they're going to be our twos, and we've never had that before. We've always had this thing where it was like threefold. It was like the guys, and then it was like the Dylan Fairchilds and the Micahs and the guys coming up, and then it was like the freshmen. Well, now we don't have that. So when I talk about chemistry and getting things going, 100%. Now, we didn't have a complete receiving core in camp. London Humphrey's missing a little bit. Kobe Young missed a little bit because he had this injury, that injury. We had Trevor miss a little time there. We had somebody else, I forget who it was, miss a little bit. So that hurts a little bit, but that has nothing to do with the other. I mean, you want to attribute it to something? Attribute it to what I think is 2 pretty dang good defenses, and us not being at our best against Kentucky, and we got to improve that. But it's nothing to do with the preseason camp. I can assure you of that.
Guys, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but truly my heart went out to Palmer Thomas, who asked the question, because have either of y'all gotten caught in that situation with Kirby where he asks a question and you kind of get caught of like, am I supposed to answer this, or is this a hypothetical? Because that's exactly what he got hit with, Ben.
But he nailed the answer, though, so that was the best part. Because you could see when Palmer got the answer right and he understood where Kirby was tracking and they were on the same page, he gave him a good in-depth answer. I thought about what the philosophy has been around the offensive line and what it is right now from a depth standpoint, and the guys that they need to get rotated and all this. And it's just, again, you don't always get, full Kirby in his element, showing his personality moment. I feel like we got a little bit of that. I think that for anybody who wonders, who hasn't heard Kirby Smart on the microphone, getting a little bit of someone's going to get mad at me for calling it this, but wise ass attitude. I love Kirby when he gets in those modes. He definitely gave Palmer some of that, but I thought ultimately appreciative to Palmer. Shout out for asking the question, because I think we got some good insight into how they sort of approach their depth and their roster management and things like that, especially during fall camp.
I thought it was the best answer, honestly, Kirby gave. And you usually know that you're going to get a little pushback when, as he did in this clip, which I didn't play this part, when he hits you with, I don't understand your question, because that's sort of when he's putting you, on the defensive. But no, I mean, you think about, as Kirby laid out there, you used to be able to count on having guys 2, 3, 4 years, 2 or 3 years before you really needed them. And that's not the case anymore. With the portal, those guys are going to leave. I mean, think about guys from the last year or so who have left, some of those young receivers. Think about an AJ Harris, who wasn't really in the mix, and maybe he would be this year, but, he left after a year. It totally changes the calculation and how you get those guys prepared and how you get guys ready a little bit sooner than, that they usually, or they were in the past. Kipp, what did you think about what Kirby shared there and sort of his look at the roster management side of things?
He's the ultimate contrarian. You had that. Palmer needed to ask that question the opposite. I mean, however you want him to respond, you need to go ahead and say the opposite. So, I would just say, did you guys have built so much chemistry because you've played the young players, and then he would have came with the exact opposite. It's hurt our chemistry because we've had to That's just how it is with Kirby. But at the same time, I mean, I see the impact because I do the how transfers performed last week. In the past, this transfers article would be guys that weren't getting playing time because they may not have been SEC caliber players. And so the reaction was, well, yeah, we've improved our roster, but now you start to look at it and these guys are making plays and having good games for other Power 4 programs. And you're like, well, wait, these guys could have helped Georgia this year. Yeah, they could have. But at the same time, you're battling that. If you're not getting those reps, I mean, you got 2 starters at Kentucky that played big roles in this last game because they weren't getting the snaps they needed to. So I see Kirby's point. It's a different amount of depth. You have to try to give these guys snaps, not even knowing if they're going to be on your team next year. But I think you have to actually entice them with that as well. I mean, you got to rotate guys in quicker than what he would feel comfortable with, because otherwise they're not going to see their own development on the path that they want, even though, it might not, regardless of whether it's better for them to get more playing time now or not. That's what every player wants. So it's a different carrot you have to put, the dangle, but at the same time, you got to win football games now this season. So it's a balancing act. You're playing younger guys, but you have to get these guys playing championship caliber football a lot quicker than what you did 4 or 5 years ago.
Had a chance to talk to some players on Tuesday night as well. Jalen Walker, Chaz Chambliss, Trevor Etienne. I want to share, Jalen Walker was asked about that hit on Brock Vandagriff, said that, he was told that he kind of was driving him into the ground the way he fell on top of him. I thought Jalen was really mature in talking about it, said, that I was fired up in the moment and then, knew I had to kind of move on, kind of a bang play. And he talked about, you can't linger on something like that. You got to keep playing. And to his credit, he played and did that and was outstanding. I really wonder where this defense would be if Jalen Walker was not a part of it. Want to make sure and play this clip of Trevor Etienne, and it's kind of going back to something Kirby said during his press conference about, Trevor's still a new guy. I mean, transferred to Georgia back in the winter from Florida, but has really stepped up as a leader. And Trevor was asked, why he felt comfortable being able to do that, being able to speak up as a new member of the team. And let's listen to his answer.
I kind of look at myself as an older guy on the team, being a junior now. And this team, the guys have done nothing but embrace me here. So I feel like with them being welcoming and, opening up and allowing me in their locker room and being able to be a part of that brotherhood is a reason why I feel comfortable being around those guys.
I really enjoyed getting to talk to Trevor. That's the first time we've talked to him at Georgia. Thought he was really mature. I thought he really handled the questions he got about his March arrest well. Said it was a mistake, said he was moving forward, said he addressed the team. And to me, this was the most impressive thing. He told his teammates, use me as an example. It's not worth it. And, I think that he's a guy that understood what he did was wrong and, dangerous, and lucky that it wasn't worse than it was. But I think he's really well respected within this team. Kirby's talked about this, I think, even going back to the spring. And I think he's a huge piece of this team. And Ben, what'd you think of Trevor's, what he shared, sort of what he means to this offense and what he's brought to Georgia to this point in the season?
Yeah, I mean, you can tell, again, this was the first time that he'd been speaking to the media, so you can really tell that he's someone that cares about this and people are going to respect and people are going to look to as a leader, even though he hasn't been in the program a lot. And I think you can tell if you're a transfer that's getting on the field at Georgia. I mean, we got to talk to London Humphreys after the Clemson game. I don't think y'all have gotten to talk to Colby Young yet, but just knowing, what everyone has said about him and his personality and the way that he's wired, like there is a very specific type of guy that can come to Georgia and play right away. And I think that you have to be wired a certain way. I think you have to have a certain, football wherewithal, but just a, care level that they have. And I think that you can tell that those are 3 guys that Georgia trusts a lot early on, even though, some of them have had a lot less time than other people to get on the field, but those are guys that Georgia definitely is trusting to take reps early. And again, I said it earlier, but without Trevor Etienne, I do not know that Georgia wins that football game. I mean, he really put the team on his back on that touchdown drive. And Kirby Smart mentioned it post game, like there were some situations that Georgia did not win the snap. that Georgia's offensive line lost the rep, and Trevor Etienne made something happen that got them positive yards and continued pushing them down the field. So I think that probably led to why you guys got a chance to talk to him, because I think he finally showed this is a guy that Georgia's going to have to rely on this season in certain situations for them to win and get through unscathed.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure and point out something. He was asked about what makes Georgia unique, and part of his answer was the G speaks for itself. And, I think he understood what he was signing up for, and he's done a very good job so far. Kip, any thoughts on what Trevor shared and just what we've seen from him to this point in his first season at Georgia?
Yeah, I think that he probably nailed what Georgia's looking for in its program. I mean, the first play of the game, I believe, they missed the guy off the edge, and he got tackled from behind, and that's a frustrating play. But at the same time, he's asked to pick up blocks later in the game, and he was able to do his job, and you kind of see that difference between where he is as a player and Nate Frazier, because Nate Frazier comes in and he misses a block. He doesn't pick up the guy off the left edge that for some reason Ernest Green decided he didn't even need to pay attention to. And it put pressure on Carson Beck, and he had to get rid of the ball earlier. That's a play where a guy like Trevor Etienne in the game, like I said, there were plays where he actually was able to pick up his man, and it gave Carson time to go through his progressions. I think he's a guy that's going to get better as the season goes on. As Georgia started playing against those double tackle stunts against Kentucky, Etienne had some rushing lanes. He has to learn how to cut against those stunts and go, backside instead of play side. There's a lot of openings in that game, and I think this week he's going to learn a lot from that in the film room, and I think he's going to be better as the season goes on in this offense. I just think that the more reps he gets, I think he's going to be really explosive for Georgia. He's already one of Georgia's top 2 or 3 playmakers right now, 3 games in. So I just think that we haven't seen the best of Trevor Etienne, but as Ben pointed out, I mean, thank goodness they had him. They'd be in a lot of trouble if they didn't.
For sure. Well, guys, we're looking at the bye week. Georgia obviously working through and getting ready, especially knowing that a trip to Tuscaloosa awaits them next week. If they can accomplish one thing this week, what do you want to see it be? And for me, I'll start to what we talked about earlier, just the receivers, mostly perimeter blocking, but I don't know if it was a situation where Carson Beck was just hesitant or if guys just weren't getting separation. It just felt like there was not a lot of throwing down the field, and maybe it was a little bit of both. But I want to see those receivers step up, and maybe another week will help as far as guys getting healthy. A guy like Colby Young really being 100% after he's dealt with a hamstring injury. Ben, what about you? What area of this team do you want to see improved by the time they take the field in Bryant-Denny Stadium?
Well, I know the bye week does not mean that it's an off week for Georgia football. I'm not insinuating that, but I think doing whatever you got to do to get Micah Williams, Warren Brinson, and Jordan Hall as healthy as possible for Alabama. I think that as sluggish as the offense was, part of that was, they just weren't on the field very much. And, you look at why was the Georgia offense it wasn't a great game. And there were some situations, that opportunities were missed, but I think it was a rare, uncharacteristic game from Carson Beck. I don't think you're going to get that in 2 weeks. So I think for me, the defensive line, Kip brought it up earlier. When you've got 2 defensive linemen playing more snaps than your starting quarterback, it's not a good formula for having the football. It's not a good formula for sustaining. Like, nothing is going in your favor if that's the statistic that you can throw out there. That's the way that it was with Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins and Christian Miller. I'll also say the fact that Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins played as well as he did, given as many snaps as he played, is pretty remarkable. But I think just getting Georgia's defensive line as healthy as it can be, I was thinking after week 1, if Micah Williams hadn't gotten banged up, that this Georgia defensive front was going to be, from a pass rush standpoint, one of the most lethal pass rushes that Georgia had in a long time. And I still think with Jalen Walker and some other guys, that can be the case. But I think Micah Williams is such an integral part of that I think getting those guys healthy so that you have a full stable along the defensive line in Tuscaloosa is what's going to make or break the outcome of that game on the road.
To your point too, Ben, with TID, he left the game at one point, was kind of slow, getting up after a play, wound up coming back, but played as much as he did. Very impressive. Kipp, what about you? What do you want to see this team achieve during this bye week? Unmute yourself, my friend.
Oh, 2 in a row.
My gosh.
2 episodes in a
Bye
row.
week. Oh my goodness, I got a streak going here. I think you guys hit on the main 2 points. I kind of hinted at it earlier. I think if you're going to change anything, this is when you do it. And I do think that, maybe if your best 5 offensive linemen is Monroe Freeling out there, then Xavier Truss becomes maybe your swing guy at right guard and right tackle. If that's your best 5 out there, you need to figure that out this week. And I think this is wrinkle week. This is where you install new plays. This is you get new guys involved. So again, Georgia, you need explosives in the passing game. So does that mean, does that mean Colby Young downfield the more? You get him healthy in the offense. Is he ready? Does that mean London Humphreys, again, a similar situation? Is he a guy that can help you get the downfield passing game going? We haven't seen as much from Anthony Evans as we thought we would at this point, but maybe it's one of the young guys. I mean, it could be I also didn't mention, Michael Jackson III, if he can help you guys get explosive. But I'm thinking about the freshman here, Sokovia White. I mean, that's a guy that had a good summer. Looked like a guy that, again, was going to be the next underrated player in Georgia's offense that everyone goes back and looks at his ranking, goes, this guy has made plays every single time he's been on the field. So that could be a situation for him. But, I mean, maybe even Dwight Phillips. I mean, you put that guy out in the slot. If it's not Arian Smith, Dwight Phillips is the fastest player on that roster. Maybe he is now. I mean, even including Arian Smith. So those are opportunities where you can't guard that kind of speed. So see what he can do maybe out there in the slot. I think this is where Alabama's defense might be preparing for Georgia to try something different, but they're not going to know what it is. And so this is where you still catch them off guard, even though they know that you're going to make it a focal point to start fast on offense. I mean, they still have to go out there and defend it. And again, Bobo's gotten a lot of heat. I think the onus really needs to be on Carson Beck to come out there and be confident, make the right play calls, be willing to take chances. And at the same time, that he does need to have better protection. It broke down way early. We talked about the Clemson defensive line being maybe one of the most talented they're going to play. And then Kentucky goes out there and looks like what we thought Clemson would look like. So kind of, I think it caught everyone off guard, but it does show you guys can play better. You haven't played up to your standard on this offensive line. And so this week is where you kind of get back into the film room and figure out where you guys can improve in that area, because I do think these are fixable areas, but the explosive passing game, we don't know. We don't know if that's an aspect of this offense that they're going to be able to unlock. So that's exactly what they need to figure out this week. And so that's the biggest question with Georgia right now is, can they attack opposing defenses?
UGA Men's Basketball Minute. I had a chance to talk to Mike White, Silas Demery Jr., Blue Cane on Monday. Team is getting ready for the start of practice next week. Got some scrimmages about a month from now, Charlotte and UCF. Mike White thought he had a lot of good things to share. He said he thinks they're going to be better this year, which I do think that's the case. Heard a lot about depth and how good they feel about how deep this roster is from the starting 5 all the way down. Silas Demery Jr. talked about the excitement of some of these new guys coming in. He talked about Santo Cyril dunking on him at one point. Doesn't sound like there was a poster of that, but someone needs to work on that. Blue Cane acknowledged that he's cut the hair. Looks a lot different than he did his freshman year, but has been working on his shot, has been working on becoming more consistent. And again, super interested to see this team. It's a shame that scrimmage at Charlotte is the same day as the Georgia-Texas football game, so won't be able to be there. But those are going to be some really interesting tests early on, and I'm excited to see this group get going and see what they got to work with. All right, guys, before we get out of here, this is going to be a rare free weekend for us because there is no Georgia game. So, Ben, I'll start with you. What's on the calendar for you? How are you going to take advantage of this weekend?
I'm going to be at a high school game Thursday and Friday night. I haven't quite decided how I'm going to spend the Saturday. I'm going to watch a lot of football. I'm going to, we've talked about this a lot, but a lot of times, especially when we're, you're Jordan, you're covering all these games, but if we're covering home games or some of the road games, like, you don't watch nearly the amount of football games that you like to watch. So I think anytime that you get a free weekend during football season, you start doing pull up the schedule and looking during every time slot and saying, ooh, what am I going to be watching during this period of time? So I'm looking forward to doing that for sure.
Kipp, what about you?
Listen, I know a lot of people are upset that they're coming off just a 1-point win last weekend, but rise up. That 1-point win on Monday, that was like an exorcism was performed on the Falcons fan base. Nobody expected the Falcons to beat the Eagles. We had to deal with 95% of the TV coverage being, Jason Kelsey and just pro Eagles coverage, and they didn't know what to do because guess what? The Falcons won, and now we got a quarterback. That drive at the end, that 2-minute drill on the Manning cast with Matt Ryan watching, it was incredible. So I think I'm going to probably build that hope up again. And I can't see anything going wrong this weekend, Sunday night at home against the Chiefs. I can't see anything but, another win. I think that Kirk Cousins is getting every single snap. He's getting better. And, he looked great on, 1 or 2 drives, explosive passing game, incredible route by Drake London, just everything's coming up roses right now for the Falcons. So this is obviously going to last. I mean, this is it. So I've already started looking, at hotels for New Orleans for the Super Bowl. So yeah, I think this is, it's not an overreaction. We saw what we needed to see. This is a championship football team, and I think Kansas City's in big trouble.
Can't wait to see it. And I was actually coming back from the Braves game listening to that Falcons comeback. We're not going to talk about what happened at that Braves game. I'm definitely not going to I'm just going to mute Ben, so I don't need to hear what Ben has to think. But to hear them come back, that was incredible. And as someone who's got some friends that are Philadelphia Eagles fans, definitely enjoyed seeing that one. Well, we're going to wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening after the fact. Be sure to go to dogs247.com and subscribe. Go to our YouTube, our TikTok. Got a lot of good content, especially during this bye week. We're going to really take advantage of some of the videos we got there. So we'll wrap it up right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.